What is up, guys? This is SteadyChaos. Thank you for stopping by SteadyChaos Productions. Now, in some of my previous videos that I've posted on my channel, I've had some people in the comment section ask me what my 4K HDR10 Blu-ray settings are. And so I figured I would share those with you guys. I have already created this video, believe it or not, like 2 or 3 times with separate movies. I think I used First Man, and now I'm using Avengers Endgame, and I tried recording a little bit of footage to show you my picture settings in action on my Sony X800 Blu-ray player with my LG C10 here, and every time I go to upload it, I get copyright claim and I get it blocked. I'm not really sure why it's happening, because usually with fair use rules or laws, you can upload a clip that's, say, 15, 20, 25 seconds, you know, just to show somebody something educational, like LG C10 performance with HDR10, which is all I'm doing here. But for whatever reason, YouTube keeps blocking my content and blocking all of my uploads. So it is unfortunately for that reason why I'm here on the title or menu page for the Avengers Endgame 4K HDR10 movie. If I were to play any content from the movie itself, my video would be completely blocked. So here we are, sitting at the home screen. But either way, at least you get to see what HDR10 looks like with Avengers here, because this is in HDR10 here. If I bring up my LG C10 settings, you see filmmaker mode, and it's HDR picture mode, or filmmaker and OLED light and contrast, both 100. But we will jump into these settings, but I just wanted to preface this video by saying thank you for stopping in and checking out this video and checking out my YouTube channel. And also I wanted to let you know that I have tried repeatedly to show you guys some footage of the LG C10 with my picture settings running in HDR10, but YouTube, for whatever reason, keeps blocking these short little clips. So it is what it is. We will do our best to work with this home page or menu screen for the movie. But before we jump into the LG C10 picture settings themselves, I want to first jump into my Blu-ray player's settings. And like I said, I have a Sony X800 4K Blu-ray player. So let's do that right now. Let's jump into those settings and talk quickly about those, and then we will move on to the LG C10 picture settings, all right? Alright, so we are at my Sony X800's homepage. Now let's go up into the setup area here to access the picture settings within the Blu-ray player. Now, of course, not all of you have a Sony X800 Blu-ray player, but that's okay, because a lot of these settings you'll see within my X800 are pretty much universal across all Blu-ray players, whether you have an Oppo or Panasonic or LG or Sony. So we go down to screen settings. Now, obviously, I have HDR output on. It's set to auto, which is effectively on. One thing to note about the Sony X800, unfortunately, it does not have Dolby Vision playback. I like the Sony X800. It's a great player, and I've had it for a solid 3 years now, and I've been thinking about upgrading to a Dolby Vision player, but I'm kind of holding out until the next gen consoles come out, because I'm probably going to get both of them, and I'm hoping that at least one of them will have Dolby Vision, so I won't have to go and buy another separate 4K Blu-ray player. Time will tell. The new console should release in, what, 4 or 5 months now? We are getting awfully close. Display type, obviously TV. Now, output resolution, I have mine set to original resolution. Now, the reason I do that is I want the TV to handle the majority of the upscaling. If I'm watching a standard Blu-ray that's 1080p, I want the Sony X800 to output 1080p resolution content directly to the TV, and then I will use my much newer, much more capable LG C10 with the Alpha 9 Gen 3 processor to do the upscaling to 4K. This is a matter of preference, depends on what kind of player you have and what kind of TV you have. If you have more faith in your player, then by all means have your player do the upscaling. But in my circumstance, it doesn't get much better than the LG C10, maybe a Sony OLED in terms of upscaling, but the LG C10 with the Alpha 9 Gen 3 processor certainly does a great job upscaling, so I let the TV handle that. 24p output, most movies are 24p, I have that set to on or auto. Again, 4K upscale setting, upscale to 4K video signal and output via HDMI, I have that off. Like I just said, I want the TV to handle all of the necessary 4K upscaling. YCBCR/RGB HDMI color space. I have mine set to YCBCR 422. You see the options here. Auto, the player will select for you. 422, 444, or RGB. Now, basically what YCBCR is it's chroma subsampling, which is basically color information per pixel on your TV. Now, all 4K Blu-rays that I'm aware of anyway are encoded in YCBCR 420. Now, they are encoded in 420 to save bandwidth and memory. By encoding in 420, you have much smaller file sizes, but at the same time, you're not really sacrificing much in the way of color reproduction. It's been shown time and time again that the human eye has difficulty. It's pretty much impossible for the human eye to pick up full color rendering at RGB or 444 as opposed to partial color rendering at 422 or 420. So that is why most 4K HDR Blu-rays are in 420, because there's really no loss in quality and they get to save on bandwidth. So in this particular instance, and I mean, one caveat should be noted that if you're using a PC or a monitor, typically you want to use 444 then because it helps with text legibility. So if you're reading comments and whatnot, it helps to make the words a little bit clearer. But in terms of real-world movie viewing content, 444 and 422 or 420 don't really make much of a difference to the human eye. Now, the reason why I have mine set to 422, you're probably thinking to yourself, why wouldn't you go RGB or 444? Why wouldn't you just send full color right to your TV? Well, the reason I have it at 422 is because, as I stated, all Blu-rays, 4K Blu-rays, are encoded in 420. I want my Blu-ray player to send as close as possible to a pristine, untouched, unmanipulated video signal to my TV. At which point, I will trust my TV to do any sort of color upscaling or color up conversion to RGB if necessary. So that is why it's 422, because 422 is the closest value to 420. So there will be minimal color upscaling or color up conversion done by my 4K Blu-ray player and then sent to my TV. So you're getting basically, by selecting 422, you're getting to quote unquote, use kind of a gross word, the most unmolested video signal you can possibly send to your TV. At which point, as I said, I would trust my TV to handle any color upscaling should it be necessary for the image to properly display. So that's my reasoning behind that. HDMI deep color output refers to 10-bit color. It's set to on or auto, as obviously this is an HDR10 compatible television, and we have an HDR10 Blu-ray with wide color gamut, so we want HDMI deep color. The rest of these settings are pretty standard. Obviously 3D is off. TV screen size is 55 inches with a 16:9 ratio, and the screen format's normal, all that stuff. But I just wanted to get those settings in there and quickly talk about the chroma subsampling in 422, because that can be kind of confusing. I've done a lot of research on this myself. Just a few weeks ago, I was like, wait a second, what is all this chroma subsampling stuff? Let me do some research on this to make sure that I'm pretty clear on it before I make a video talking about it or making recommendations to people. So, with all of my Blu-ray player settings out of the way and documented, let us jump into the LG C10 picture settings. Now, the first thing you can do is just go to General real quick and go to AI Service. My AI Picture Pro is off, and my AI Brightness Control and Auto Genre Selection, AI Sound Pro, all that stuff is off. I do not want the artificial intelligence of the television manipulating my TV's calibration in any way. Perhaps you want the TV to use some of these functions. Perhaps you want the TV to measure ambient light and adjust your television's brightness accordingly. That's totally fine. It's totally up to you. It's entirely subjective. Just personally speaking for myself, I like to set my TV the way it looks most pleasing, and I don't want the settings to deviate from that. That's why I have these all set to off. And then you go up to picture settings and aspect ratio, again, 16:9, just as it was in the Blu-ray player. Energy saving is off. You do not want to dim the screen by using energy saving. Sorry, environment. I know I've said that before, but HDR performance is important, more important. And like I've said in prior videos I posted, televisions these days are so energy efficient. It really doesn't matter if you use energy saving or not. You're not really adding a whole lot to your electricity bill by having energy saving off. Additional settings, again, eye comfort mode, that's one of those automated AI settings off. The one important one you have here is HDMI Ultra HD Deep Color. So the particular HDMI input on your TV that you are using with your 4K Blu-ray player, you want to make sure that that input is set to on for HDMI Ultra HD Deep Color. If you set it to off, you will not be able to get proper 10-bit color depth. So make sure that is on. And going back, now I have my picture mode settings to filmmaker mode. That is a new mode for 2020 televisions, and I find it to be very accurate, and it is supposed to be one of the most accurate modes for this television straight out of the box. So that is why I use it for my movies. Now let us jump really quick into the movie itself so that I can bring up my HDR settings. The home page on my Blu-ray player is merely an SDR, so these are my SDR settings. So let's get that movie up, and then my HDR settings will pop up. Alright, so we have the movie's menu screen up now, so we are in HDR10 here. So let's open up the settings again real quick. Okay, so I know I've talked about this before, but it bears repeating. OLED light and contrast. Ideally, you will set OLED light and contrast both to 100 when watching high dynamic range content. High dynamic range content really thrives on that max range between your really inky blacks and then your really bright specular highlights. By maximizing your TV's brightness potential in high dynamic range, you are maximizing its HDR performance. It's really just that simple. Now, of course, it's your TV, you know, set it how you see fit. Everybody has different seating conditions, ambient lighting conditions, you know, the way that they like to watch their TV. Do they like it really bright? Do they like it a little bit dimmer? It's totally up to you. If you want to watch HDR content and set your OLED light to 75, 70, 65, then fine. That's totally acceptable. Just know that ideally, for your TV's best HDR performance, you would have them both at 100. But of course, you don't want to be, you know, gritting your teeth the whole time you're watching a bright HDR movie and getting a headache and straining your eyes. If necessary, if you feel like the TV's too bright at 100 apiece, then certainly turn it down. You are well within your rights to do so, and don't let anybody tell you otherwise. Brightness, I have to the default setting of 50. Now with this movie, it is such a sharp, clear, pristine movie with absolutely no grain. There is no filmic grain in this movie whatsoever, and I love that. I mean, I don't mind a little bit of filmic grain. It adds a little bit of that additional cinematic touch and feel. But with certain mediums, like just for instance, The Last of Us Part 2, that game is so grainy, and I really wish there was some sort of slider to turn it down. It's just too much sometimes in certain games and certain movies. But with a really clean, clear, vibrant, vivid, colorful movie like Avengers Endgame, you have no grain. So when that's the case, I tend to turn up the sharpness a little bit to really bring out that clear, sharp edge enhancement, because that's what sharpness is. It's basically edge enhancement. Now, if this were a movie like, say, First Man, the movie based on Neil Armstrong in the 50s and 60s going into space, that movie went for a very old school cinematic, kind of like 20 millimeter, I don't know if that's what it is, 20 or not, but the sort of old school filmic look with a lot of heavy grain. In that instance, I would turn the sharpness down to say, like, you know, between 4 and 8 maybe. As when you turn the sharpness down, you tend to smooth out the picture a little bit. You tend to mitigate some of that grain. So it really is your picture settings. They really are dependent on the particular movie that you're playing. And it's not uncommon for me anyway. I am a bit of a videophile, I admit, but it's not uncommon for me to change my settings up so that they're specifically tailored for every individual movie that I watch. I am just that anal retentive about my settings. But, you know, like I said, this is a nice clear movie, so I add a little bit of sharpness because I'm not fighting any grain. So there's really no penalty to adding the sharpness. And the color, I like to, with movies like this that are sort of futuristic, that involve space travel, that involve, you know, superheroes and their powers, their power, like Iron Man's cannons out of his hands. They're really, really bright, and those specular highlights in HDR really pop. It's colorful. So with movies like that, I like to pump up the color a little bit more than the default setting. So the default setting in filmmaker mode is, I believe it's 50. In this movie, I have it on 59, just to really bring out this beautiful movie. The colors are so rich and vibrant in this movie. Now, of course, you don't want to get out of control and, you know, set the color up to 80, 85, 90, because then you're just oversaturating the picture. If you want to do that, then by all means, go for it. But you want to, I try to be reasonable with my color setting, and here I feel like between 55 and 60 is a really good match for this movie. Tint, I don't touch, I always leave that at 0. Advanced controls, dynamic contrast off. Now, if you feel like your high dynamic range performance on your LG C10 or C9 or, you know, BX or GX, whatever you have, they're all pretty much the same OLED panel for the most part. If you feel like your HDR performance is just a little bit too dim and you want to spruce it up, you want a little bit more brightness, you can turn this on. See here, it's pumping up the brightness a little bit better shadow detail. That's fine. It'll give you a little bit more pop, maybe a little bit more shadow detail. But one thing to keep in mind is that it will overshoot the EOTF curve in high dynamic range 10 mode. And so if you're a purist, ideally you're going to leave dynamic contrast off. And ideally HDR10 in and of itself would provide you with enough contrast, with enough brightness to satisfy you. But again, if you feel like you need a little bit more brightness, then by all means, you can turn these on, but I like to have this off. All right, dynamic tone mapping. Now this is a controversial one, to say the least. You have a lot of people on Reddit, on YouTube, on AVS Forum. They have varying opinions on this setting. So if you go to off, see the screen, it just gets a little bit dimmer. So, come on, off. See the screen get a little bit dimmer there? Now what's happening with dynamic tone mapping off is the player is sending static metadata or static high dynamic range information to the television. And the television is doing its best to follow that coveted EOTF curve from the shadow detail of the TV all the way up to the TV's peak brightness, where there's a gentle roll-off. Ideally, any TV will do its best to follow that EOTF curve when displaying HDR10 content. And the LG CX does a good job. It follows it very closely, right up until about 650 to 700 nits where it rolls off. That's fine, that's a pretty accurate setting. Now, if you want to set dynamic tone mapping to on, what's happening is the screen's getting brighter, you notice that right away, and the TV is taking that metadata and it is dynamically analyzing it on a scene by scene and frame by frame basis, and it is manipulating that EOTF curve to generate a more vibrant, contrasted, bright image. An image that maybe some might call sort of eye sugar. You know, it's pleasing, it's bright, it's colorful. Most people would probably want that. However, it's not, you know, the drawback is it's not the most accurate setting out there because it's got that dynamically evolving and changing EOTF curve. Sometimes it can overly brighten the screen on a global basis. Sometimes it can over brighten shadow detail, making the scene look a little bit artificial or unintended. And sometimes because the screen gets so bright, what happens is when you have a bright specular highlight, like an explosion for example, you have dynamic tone mapping really pumping up that brightness, and when that happens on really bright sections, you can sort of lose some of the detail in that highlight. So in an explosion, you might lose some of that fireball detail, you might lose that defined edge on the explosion, and you could have a little bit of sort of detail loss or blowout, or as it's called sometimes, clipping. This is something to keep in mind when you're using dynamic tone mapping on. Now, in my experience, clipping with dynamic tone mapping is generally not a problem, and for the most part the TV does a good job of mitigating clipping. It only happens on rare occasion, in my opinion. And when it does happen, the detail that you're losing is minute. You're not losing, for example, if the previous example I used, a fireball, it's not just like one orange blob and you've lost all detail with dynamic tone mapping on. No, you might lose a little bit of detail, and generally speaking, that fireball on the screen is going to be moving so quickly you probably won't even notice that loss of detail. So basically what you're trading off is a little bit of loss in specular highlight detail for a generally more vibrant and bright image. Is that worth it to you? For me, it is worth it with certain movies, especially this kind of movie. But to other people, it's not. It's something to keep in mind. But as it pertains to my settings, I have dynamic tone mapping on. Now let us get back into the settings here. I could go on about dynamic tone mapping for friggin' hours. I'm such a geek when it comes to this stuff. I've been talking about dynamic tone mapping so long here that the TV kicked me out of the menu system. Alright, so we were on super resolution. I have that set to off. I feel like there's really no need to use this artificial metric. You're watching a 4K movie that's already crystal clear and really sharp to begin with. And if I wanted to add a little bit more edge enhancement, I wouldn't use super resolution. I would just go back and I would go to sharpness and I would adjust here as necessary. So back into advanced controls. Now color gamut, I have it set to wide, and another option could be auto, as the TV will select the necessary color gamut or the correct color gamut for you depending on whether or not you're playing 10-bit content or SDR 8-bit content. Now what wide means is it means that the television is displaying or forcing the source that you're playing to be displayed at the television's native or maximum potential when it comes to color reproduction. So in terms of DCI-P3 color space, this TV, the LG C10, can do about 98 to 99% of DCI-P3. So it's okay to use wide with this particular movie because this particular movie is HDR10 and wide color gamut compatible. It was mastered in DCI-P3. So having this movie, this source, expanded to the TV's native potential of 99% DCI-P3 is okay. You're not going to get oversaturation. It'll still look nice. However, if you were to take a, say, a 1080p movie, the regular Blu-ray version of Avengers Endgame that was mastered in Rec. 709, which is a smaller or narrower color space than DCI-P3, and then you were to set the color gamut to wide on your television, what you're doing is you're artificially expanding that Blu-ray's color space to match the TV's native potential of 99% DCI-P3. When you do that with a regular Blu-ray, you could be looking at colors that look overly saturated, that look off, that are simply inaccurate. So in that respect, if you're watching a regular Blu-ray, I would set it to auto. Now you're probably wondering what is extended. That's a good question. I have not researched this myself. I've seen a few people on Reddit say it's somewhere in between auto and wide. So maybe it simply expands the color gamut of a 1080p Blu-ray slightly. I'm not sure. I can't say for certain. I'd have to do a little bit more research on it to recommend it one way or another. Either way, I either use auto or I use wide, not extended. Now, gamma, you cannot change when watching HDR10 content because the TV is following that EOTF curve I talked about. Now, white balance, I have it set to warm 1, blue -12. And the reason why I have it set to warm 1 and blue -12 is because I've said this in many of my previous videos, but OLED TVs tend to run a little bit on the cool/bluish side. So in order to combat that a little bit, I do warm 1 and then blue -12. Sometimes I'll run warm 2, and then I'll go down to blue and run -6. And I like that too, that looks nice. Having warm 2 gives you a nice cinematic look, and also using warmer colors, especially if you're watching this TV at night, it's much better for your eyes. There's less strain involved with warmer colors as opposed to cooler blue colors. And some have said that by staying up late at night on your monitor or TV, and blasting your eyes with really, really cool blue colors from whatever you're watching, whether it's your HDR TV or your monitor or your tablet or whatever, that can actually give you headaches, strain your eyes, and it can mess up your circadian rhythms. So by setting your television here to warm 2 and blue -6, you're not only getting a nice cinematic look and sort of mellowing out that bluish tint from OLEDs, but you're also doing your eyes a bit of a favor. So your eyes thank you very much. Color management system, I don't mess with any of that. Peak brightness is automatically set to high when watching high dynamic range content, so we leave that at high. Picture options, noise reduction, MPEG noise reduction, and smooth gradation, these are all set to off. I'm watching a 4K HDR10 movie here. This movie, as I've said many times already in this video, is really sharp, it's really clear, it doesn't get much better than this. So there's really no need to reduce noise or to try to smooth out the picture with smooth gradation. There's really no noticeable banding, so that is why these are all off. By setting some of these to on, it has a tendency to kind of overly smooth out the screen, and you can lose a little bit of detail, fine detail. So that's not really something I want to do with a 4K movie. Now, if you're watching, say, a lower quality or a lower bit rate video on YouTube that was at, say, 720p and it was kind of a mess, then you might want to think about using some of these settings. But with 4K movies, nah. Nah. All right, black level, I have it set to auto or low. High tends to wash out the picture, so leave it at auto or low. Real Cinema is automatically set to on. Motion Eye Care, this is another one of those AI functions where the TV automatically adjusts brightness by analyzing image movements to prevent glare and reduce energy consumption. No, thank you. Do not mess with my picture settings, LG C10, I'm good. Now we move on to the last setting, True Motion. Now the motion handling of this television is very good no matter what setting you put it on, but I find that if I'm feeling like a purist, or I'm in that sort of mood with a particular movie, I will often set it to off. That will turn off all motion interpolation completely, so you will get zero dreaded soap opera effect. What is soap opera effect, you may ask? Soap opera effect is when you set the TV to the natural or smooth functions and to a lesser degree cinema clear, it has a tendency to use interpolation or de-judder or de-blur settings within the TV to smooth out the movement. And when you smooth out the movement like that, artificially to some degree, you make the characters almost look like they're gliding on the screen. Think of a soap opera. I don't remember the last time you watched a soap opera. Who knows, maybe your mom still watches one. But if you've ever watched a soap opera, you think about how the characters look and move on the screen, it looks weird. Like, it looks almost like they're moving at 1.5 times the normal rate. Like, they're almost in a slight fast forward motion. They look glidey, they look overly smooth. And when you set, so let's set this to smooth here. See everything? It just looks, I don't know, it's hard to, I don't know if the camera can really pick it up, and it's hard to put your finger on it, but it just looks artificially smooth. It doesn't look cinematic like it should. So that is why purists prefer off. Now, with off, it's not all the hunky-dory either, because what happens is with an OLED television, they have nearly instantaneous pixel response times, meaning that they can put a frame up on the screen like that, much faster than an LED LCD TV can. And when you're watching low frame rate content, like a 4K movie that only has 24 frames per second, you can get what's called stutter on the screen. So if you have a panning shot where the camera is going from right to left slowly, then you can see a little bit of that frame stutter because the LG C10 is populating those frames so quickly, and there's only 24 frames per second. Now, if you were watching a 60 frame per second source, then there would not be nearly as much stutter. That wouldn't be as much of an issue. But because of pixel response times being so fast, and because movies are rendered in 24 frames per second, you get stutter. So personally, for me, in order to eliminate some of that stutter, but not get to the point where I have that dreaded soap opera effect, I use Cinema Clear. Cinema Clear adds a little bit of motion interpolation to the screen, but it doesn't overdo it. That's the key. It keeps the movie looking cinematic. It keeps a little bit of blur in the movie and a little bit of stutter, but it's not so bad that if you see a panning shot, you're like, what is going on? That stutter's terrible. You know, it's a good set it and forget it mode. It's a good happy medium. Now, if you were so inclined, you could go down to user and you could manually adjust the de-judder and de-blur interpolation settings here. Or if you wanted to, you could use what's called black frame insertion, otherwise known as OLED Motion Pro. The problem with OLED Motion Pro is so low, medium, high. The screen gets so dark when it's set to high, and you get really bad perceptible flicker. It kills your high dynamic range performance because it's dimming the screen too. It's not a great setting for movies, in my opinion. I would not recommend black frame insertion with high dynamic range content. You are just doing your specular highlights a disservice. That is why I set it to off, to preserve highlight detail, to preserve specular highlights and HDR performance. And really, you're not too worried about motion, or smooth motion as it is, when you're watching a movie. You're sitting back on your couch, you're relaxing, you're just taking it in. OLED Motion Pro or black frame insertion is more of a setting for gamers than it is for movie watchers. But just keep in mind, it's there should you want to use it. So yeah, that pretty much does it for all of my settings. For a quick recap here, for all you people who don't want to watch the whole video here, just want to see my settings. So filmmaker mode, 100, 100, 50, 18, 59, 0. Advanced controls off. On dynamic tone mapping off. Wide color gamut. White balance, warm 2, blue -6, or warm 1, blue -12. And peak brightness high. Picture options. Off, off, off. Black level auto or low. Motion eye care off. And true motion cinema clear. So that is pretty much going to do it for me, guys. I hope you have enjoyed this video. Let me know in the comment section down below what you think. What Blu-ray player do you have, and what are your settings? And if you liked the video, certainly leave a like. And if you have not done so yet, subscribe to the channel. And until next time, guys, we will see you later.